Okay, looks like the room is filling up, so we could maybe get started. Thank you everyone for coming. If you're in this room, you're here for Otherness through the lens of Asian horror. My name is Lee Murray and I'm an award-winning writer and editor from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I am your moderator today. And I'm very, very excited to welcome my absolutely stupendous contributors, the panelists here today, my dear, dear friends, the Sisterhood of the Crane, because we are going to be talking about this book here, Black Cranes, Tales of Unquiet Women. And it's a little bit of a celebration for us because we're just hot off the heels of a Bram Stoker Award win for this little volume. So welcome to my guests. We have Angela Yuriko Smith, we have Geneve Flynn, and we have Rena Mason. So maybe if we could just go around and tell us who you are. Try not to be too modest because I know that Asian girls tend to be. So let's try and sort of play yourselves up, make it sound good, okay? Because we've got 20 people here listening, and so we want to impress them. So Angela, would you like to go first, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's sure. Everybody gets to watch me try to talk myself up first. My name is Angela Yuriko Smith. I have 2 stories in Black Cranes, which was such a really awesome project to be involved with. I am a Bram Stoker Award nominee or finalist in 2018 and recently 2020 Mentor of the Year. Is that good enough?
No, you forgot to say some other things like, you know, publisher at Space and
Oh,
Time
right.
and incredible poet and all of those other things. But okay, we'll let you off. All right, Geneve.
Hi, I'm Geneve Flynn. I'm from Brisbane, Australia, originally from Malaysia. So all those creepy tales of ghosties and myths and things like that, that's my jam. That's the things I like. I'm a fiction editor and I specialize in speculative fiction. And I'm Lee's co-editor for Black Cranes. And it was a huge, huge honor to work on this book with Lee. And yes, we're both super excited that we recently snagged the Bram Stoker Award. I'm also a published short story author. My horror fiction's been published in various publications. The latest one's on Pseudopod, which is the last story in Black Cranes, Littleworm. So if you'd like to have a listen to that, there's a very naughty Malaysian swear word that the narrator pronounced perfectly. So I was really thrilled with that. That's my CV.
Yes, definitely catch that Pseudopod recording of Geneve Flynn's Little Worm. So in case anyone missed that the first time around. Thanks, Geneve. Rena.
Hi, I am Rena Mason. I'm currently living in Olympia, Washington. I am Thai and Chinese is my heritage. And I have won the Bram Stoker Award in 3 categories for first novel, long fiction, and short fiction. I'm currently co-editing an anthology coming up from the HWA's series of other fears, other terrors, and that's mine. That's all.
That's all. She's also a screenwriter. She forgets all of these little things, you know.
I have so much going on.
Yeah, and a community builder and a wonderful advocate for horror. That's for sure. So, and one of the most welcoming and hardworking people in the business. So as you can see, I'm quite impressed by these women. If you're listening into this panel in the back of the room, I'm going to ask some questions of them, and if you have questions as we go through, please put them in the chat, and I'll do my very best to get to those questions either as we go through the discussion or at the end of the session. So please do use the chat. So and you should also know that it's being recorded. So Okay, so I'm going to start actually with Jennifer and ask her how the project came about, because it's quite an unusual story.
It is, and it kind of talks about the value of going to conventions and meeting, folks that are just like you, because that's where I met Lee for the first time. We'd known of each other through the Australian Horror Writers and on Facebook, but we never met. And Lee and I were both conscientious Asians, so we were there far too early for a panel that we're trying to get to. And I saw Lee just browsing some of the authors' stands, and I thought, oh, I have to go up and say hello. And we started chatting, and then we both kind of realized we're the black sheep in the literary family, if you will. We both wrote horror, we're both women and both Asian, and we've got both Asian heritage. And we thought, where are the stories that reflect our experiences? And we struggled to come up with, some titles. And we thought, and then Lee just looked at me, and she had that wicked gleam in her eye, and she said, we should do something like that. And of course, my little heart's pounding out of my, it's like, oh my God, Lee Murray's just asked me to collaborate. And I very calmly said, that sounds great, Lee. And that's kicked us off. And we just came up with it, the premise, and then we sought out all these fantastic writers. We went digging, and we found that there are actually a lot of very talented Southeast Asian writers, and and then we put together the anthology just like that. It was just threw it together, and it came out. So that was it. That's our story.
I think you're right, though. It was a question of, where are these writers? Where are they? Why aren't their voices more prominent? And suddenly we saw a space in the market and people that needed a voice that we hadn't really realized. We're sort of striving on our own. I think that's a lot of the case with Asian voices, where we're striving all by ourselves, and we should be more collective, because we can have can amplify the voice and have more to say if we are a group, which is the beauty, of course, of anthologies, an opportunity to showcase work that really represents otherness. So and so I guess we should ask Angela and Rena sort of, why'd you come on board? Sort of what was it about the anthology premise, or just the idea that sort of engaged you? Because actually everybody we approached, Genevieve and I, said yes, but several people weren't able, because their schedules just didn't allow for it, and then of course COVID made it even worse. So why did you come on board, Angela?
For me, it was the timing. Well, I already knew you and I already liked you, but it was the timing, because there was all the things with the China flu and all that kind of Asian racism that was coming up, and it sideswiped me as in kind of a, what? You can't be racist against Asians. That's not a thing. We don't, that never happens. And here it was, and it was some really ugly things going on in America. As Rena, we've been seeing it in the news. But it really affected me, because it reminded me back to my grandmother, who was affected by that. But for that was her daily life. That was just the way it was. And so she really wanted to be American and not have any of that Asian. So my mother grew up kind of this weird blended contrast. Like, she was constantly arguing with herself, and still is. And she knows it if she's watching. We talk about this. And I kind of inherited some of that from her. So I had been at this point where I was kind of going, I'm not all Asian, I'm part Asian, but what does that even mean? And which side am I on? And are there sides? And then you came along with this project, and ultimately it was like, what can I do? And I don't know what I can do. I guess I could, post things on Facebook, but I really wanted to do something. And so this anthology kind of allowed me to pour all of that into these stories, which is, I probably got a little too enthusiastic and a little too scary with it, because I was like, yes, let's do this, But that was, for me, it was almost like a cathartic thing to, there's nothing that I can really do but this. And so I did this.
Yeah, that's powerful, isn't it? And obviously had a personal impact on you too, with you thinking about your grandmother and that historical sort of repetition of events that you were seeing play out.
Yeah, because it's like going full circle. I mean, I thought we were way past that, and I guess you don't really see racism if you're not part of it. You know what I mean? Like, it's happening maybe in other parts of the world or in other neighborhoods, but we're not aware of it wherever we are if it's not a part of our lives. And so suddenly seeing it all over the news, that was my anger, was like, what? My grandmother dealt with this. It was done. And now we're just doing it's all over again. We're just doing it all over again. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Rena.
My mind's a little bit different. I had worked with Lee before on an anthology that she did called Hellhole, and she sort of pushed me out of my box with that one. And I thought, well, she asked me to do Black Cranes, and I couldn't say no. and she did it again, where she sort of not pushed me out of my box because, you know, I'm Asian, but I wanted to do something a little bit different, and it worked out, and it was good in that way. And then also, yeah, I mean, because I think there's a sisterhood here, you know, and I'm sure it's the same for other cultures and other people too. But, you know, I've always felt like family, you know, when Lee and I first met, and, you know, and Angela, I mean, there just really aren't that many Asian women in particular, writers that write horror, that when we, you know, go to conventions and whatnot, and I just feel closer to you in that regard. And so if you're going to ask me to do a project like that, I would, you know, I would more likely jump on board and say, oh, that sounds like a great idea, and than I would for if it was somebody else.
Oh, that's very kind. I think you're right, though, about a shared understanding, because that is essentially what Genevieve was saying about those expectations, you know, two conscientious Asian girls turn up and we automatically realize that that's the reason we're there. There was this sudden understanding of, you know, we've been socialized to be early, to be conscientious, to be diligent, which worked very well for me with Genevieve as my co-editor, because she goes to the, you know, she checks everything. She goes to the very corners of the page, you know, and checks for everything. So it's but it was essentially that shared understanding and expectation, which was really cementing. And I think you're right, Rena. I think that is probably what other people saw, that there's an opportunity for community and shared understanding and that collective voice. So and otherness was the key theme of and it seems to have been the theme of this whole year. And I think, Angela, you touched on that. Rena, was there any personal reason why you thought that perhaps that the timing was right, or is it just the world events that were going on?
Well, the timing was definitely, it was odd, you know, the timing, how it had turned out, but it definitely it solidified me wanting to be a part of it. I mean, I had experienced when I was younger, because when I was in elementary school, like in kindergarten, we were getting in California like the last wave of Vietnamese refugees, and I got grouped in with them a lot, and I experienced racism from other people that, you know, lived in our neighborhood at the time, and they would yell at me, you know, boat people, go home, and it's like I wasn't, you know, but instead of like getting upset about it, I just thought that, you know, they don't understand or whatever, and then I carried on, and it didn't surface again for a while, but it was always there. It's always underlying, you know, especially when you're in groups, especially in groups of women. I see that a lot, but it's very subtle. It's always there though. And then with the recent pandemic stuff and yeah, seeing the news, it was all really triggering. And I just had to keep away from the news, watching the news a lot. And even now, they have shows about the special news about the Asian and how to get the people together and whatnot. And even some of that's still triggering. So I just, so writing the story for me was cathartic in that it was going back to like taking historical qualities and things from history that were still, where you were still fighting against the other, but it was the other within the other versus other within, from another race, I wanted to play on that a little bit with the story for Black Cranes.
Yeah, you definitely succeeded with that. What about you, Genevieve, personally, and in terms of the timing, was that significant for you?
Personally, it was just an opportunity to write. I think Angela touched on it. That sense that you're, because I've born in Malaysia, but I moved to Australia when I was quite young. So I don't feel Asian enough when I go back to Malaysia because I don't understand a lot of what the language and the cultures and that sort of thing. But in Australia as well, I'm obviously not the typical white Aussie Australian. So I think, where do I fit? So being able to write about that and explore some of those feelings, I think, in the stories, that was really freeing to be able to just go with it. And before you think, oh, is this too Chinese? Is this too Asian? Is it not going to find a home just because it's dealing with stuff that I understand, but will the readership understand? But just having that space to just let loose with my stories and really dig into some of that sense of being the other within my own culture, but within Malaysian culture, but also in Australian culture. So that was a huge boon for me doing Black Cranes. That's personally anyway. And politically in Australia, we're not that far away from the White Australia policy, where it was very much the government wanted to keep Australia for white Australians. And so it was on the back of a lot of Asian people coming into Australia. And then when I arrived in Australia, and it was in the 80s, I think, so it was not that long past the white Australia policy being abolished. So there was still a lot of anti-Asian feeling. And even with some of our politicians recently, like Pauline Hanson, they're talking about mainland Australia and that sort of thing, where there is that sense that you don't belong here. You're not really one of us, and that you're a threat, that you're part of the yellow peril that's here to take our jobs, here to buy up our property, that sort of thing. And you just think, well, where do I fit in this? And writing stories for Black Cranes helped me explore some of that and kind of take back a little bit of the power as well. I think this is where I sit. This is who I am. This is where I sit.
Yes, I think that's you've really hit the nail on the head there, because all of us actually have that Asian diaspora. We're all come from Western cultures where we're very fluent with those Western attitudes, but we also live our Asian cultures within those Western attitudes. And I'm a third generation Chinese New Zealander. And interestingly, I was telling the story to Angela just recently, but I was approached by a researcher who's doing some research on Asian women immigrants to New Zealand. And she was investigating my grandmother, Wai Fongi, who came into New Zealand in 1939. And she already had one daughter, and she then had 5 other daughters, and several other daughters, but 4 others that were considered refugees, even though they were born in New Zealand. And one of those was my mother. And so it was quite shocking for my mother to discover that she's classed as a refugee, even though she's born in New Zealand and she's 78 years old. So these kind of microaggressions and even from within our own community, this was a Chinese researcher looking and studying my grandmother, which I thought was fascinating. And also she said my grandmother's maiden name was incorrect. And I said, no, this is my grandmother's maiden name. And she said, no, the archives say this. And I said, no, I think that my grandmother knew what her own maiden name was. You know?
Did we hear of
And
a
so
typo?
so there's this whole, but who recorded that information? You know, was it someone a colonist, a European who recorded the information? And so there's this sort of erasure, and not necessarily intentional, but there is an erasure, and it's stuck to it because what is in the records must be accurate. And the stories this is our opportunity to tell our own stories with our own voices in the way we want them told, and not somebody else. So for me personally, that was one of those opportunities that I couldn't give up. So hence, you know, not you don't normally write a story in an anthology that you appear in, but I was very lucky to have Geneve so we were able to do that, having two editors. So and I think there was a comment in here from Marie Wood, I believe, saying that similar situation for African American community, and I think that that is very true. That very pointed now with the Black Lives Matter, how there is this internal racism, microaggressions. Well, racism, I think, is probably the strongest word and the right one, that is occurring in the United States. So it was, you know, this anthology has taken off in that movement, and I think perhaps that people have noticed. Look, I'm talking too much. Why is horror the right place to discuss difficult and emotive topics like otherness? Because it's a hard subject. Rena, can I start with you?
I feel like horror is one of the best places, because you can run through the whole gamut of emotions with horror, no matter where you're coming from in it. Like it can be romantic, you know, it's dark, but it can be romantic. It can make you cry. It can really bring out deep feelings. Whereas, you know, some other genres might not work as well, you know, to bring that out. And those same emotions that you have about otherness, especially from our standpoint of, you know, being the other, I think are best shown through the lens of horror, because to me that's how it feels. It feels horrifying, you know. And if you think about a lot of horror, even, you know, a lot of white horror, they're still scared of the other. As far as, you know, if you think about stories that are written about, you know, extraterrestrials or aliens, or, you know, I mean, it's still a fear of the other, even though they're using aliens instead of race.
Yeah, no, excellent point. Genevieve.
I think I kind of referenced this in my Stoker speech when we did our acceptance speech, is that we kind of see the world for what it is. Like we don't flinch from the horrible stuff. We don't turn away. We kind of accept that it's there, and that we're, even though we deal in fear, I think we're not afraid to kind of poke around in some of that, and to really bring it up to light. So I think that's why I think horror is one of the most honest genres that you can write in. Yeah, we see the world for what it is, and we still get up and face it every day. So I think that's why.
Oh yeah, that was a good answer. I wish I'd said that. Angela, so why is horror the right place to discuss these difficult topics like otherness?
I think one of the things for me with horror is growing up feeling like the monster. You know, I was the ugly child with no friends, that had no place. And so I was the monster. So I tend to really feel bad for the monsters, you know, kind of like Frankenstein. Mary Shelley had a lot of sympathy for the monster. And I think for me, horror is like a way to kind of bring out that ugliness and role play it a little bit and say, if I showed you this, would you run away screaming? Okay, you would. That's too much. Okay, I'll tone it down. You know, if I showed you this, but in horror, that's acceptable. And so it's a way to bring out the otherness, and show it in all the terribleness of it, but then find the empathy for that. Sometimes it's just running after you to kill you. But I tend to bond with it and, you know, make it a character of its own that you can accept and see the point of view of the monster. And so for me, that is my otherness experience, is looking at it from that point of view of, I eat seaweed in 3rd grade. That was horrific. That is practically being a monster, you know, or ume, or, you know, all the little weird things, or cuttlefish. Oh my God, you know, that was the monstrous thing that I was. And so it's, for me, that's what horror is being able to show that monster. And yes, you may run from it, but also it is what it is, you know, and we have to face it and accept it.
Yeah, I don't think I can beat those answers. Those are pretty amazing answers. And let's have a little bit about that in terms of your stories. And actually, there's a question in here, and DA asks, and I'm going to ask you about, because all of you have addressed this in your stories. So some of the stories in the book have themes of mother-daughter relationships or discuss the family. I was wondering how these familial relationships depicted are drawn from your own personal stories or a conglomerate of personal stories, and if there's something about family that is connected to values in Asian diasporic communities, which is a lot of words, but I think we all got the message. It's like, why is the family so vital in these sorts of stories? Who would like to go first?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Littleworm was definitely drawn from my own experiences. I'm at the age where we're starting to think about caring for aging parents and being caught between, you've got the aging parents on one side, you've got your own younger family that you've got to look after, and then there's all the in amongst that is the careers and what else you want, or what else you can try and squeeze into your life. And so Littleworm was very much drawn on some of the conflict that I had internally, just the conflict between the very Western ideas of, when your parents are aging, you put them into homes, and you're not looking after them within the home. But the Asian idea is very much that the extended family is a huge part of your family. You have generations all living under the same house. And so growing up in Australia, I very much have that independence where I think now I want to have my own career and dreams and that sort of thing. But then there's also that weight of guilt and expectations. They know you are the daughter in the family, and this is your job. This is the what you're expected to take on, to care for aging parents. And so it was definitely very personal for Littleworm. For A Pet is for Life, not so much. I don't have those type of things in my family, if you've read that story.
Tell everyone what A Pet is for Life is without giving away any spoilers, because there might be some people who haven't read the book. So
this one was actually my exploration of the idea that Asian women sometimes need rescuing, that we're delicate little creatures, that we can't speak up for ourselves. So somebody must come in and look after us. And so it was the idea of what happens if that savior complex goes beyond what's normal. And that was a lot of fun to write. So I don't know if it was kind of like a monster creature feature type thing, but thrown in with some of that psychological stuff. So that was
I thought it was interesting too, because you used a mask in that particular story. So the timing of that one also made it highly relevant. And, so just in terms of and how it might have been received by readers, given that we were all sort of discussing masks at the time, and Genevieve features a mask in her story, so which is quite common amongst Asian populations, where everyone wears a mask when they're on the metro or traveling in public transport or in a crowd. So more so than perhaps Western countries where that isn't done. So so that was quite a significant story too in terms of the timing, I think.
And I think also the reason that Asians might wear a mask is a little bit different to what people expect. Like you wear a mask when you're sick to prevent sharing your germs with everyone else, whereas now we're wearing masks to protect ourselves. So that kind of says a little bit about I think the psychology behind what was happening with the mask in that story as well.
Right.
No spoilers.
Why don't you tell us about your two stories, Angela, which are a bit more on the futuristic end of the spectrum?
Yes, yeah, I had Vanilla Rice and Skin Dowdy in there. And Vanilla Rice is actually a super special story for me because that was the first story I wrote where I let that Asianness into my work. And it was Brian Theowara, and I'm sure between all of us, you guys have heard this story before, so I apologize. But Brian Theowara was my mentor at the time for the Horror Writers Association. And he said, why don't you ever put, the Asian part of you in your work? And I said, well, I'm not Asian enough. I'm not full Asian. I don't have that right or that experience. And he said, you have, some of the experience. I said, yes, a blended experience. He said, well, then write that. So that's what Vanilla Rice is almost like my confession of growing up and wishing I could be either in one world or the other. I ate seaweed. Why didn't I have beautiful straight black hair? Why did I have this frizzy whatever that I had, and my mother was actually a model when she was younger, and I wanted to look like her. But at the same time, she kind of didn't want that. My grandmother didn't want that. So growing up, that was very confusing, is what is beautiful? I'm seeing these women as very beautiful. They're telling me that's not beautiful. And so in Vanilla Rice, it is a mother that can change their DNA chips and things, change the appearance of her daughter. So she chooses what is right for her daughter, which is what my grandmother would have chose for me, to be completely white, not have any of that experience at all, because to her, that was the goal, is to not be Asian at all, just wipe it off the map, and like a shameful thing. And so that's what this mother does for her daughter. And then at the end, it's the daughter really probably is a little bit me a lot. And I guess you can see that monster theme in there as well. But it was the daughter deciding her own future and kind of going forward with that and that honesty. And I guess that was because that was the first story that I wrote, which actually only got it was Rena who suggested that I write a story for that speculative fiction, Where the Stars Shine. She suggested I write something for that. That was the story I wrote for it. So it was, it's a super special story for me because it was that first one where I was like, oh, I do have an Asian experience, not the same as, Lee's or Rena's or Geneva, but what is, who does have the same experience? I mean, if we all did, it would be boring. But I think a lot of it is that, I know we have a name for it with writers, and I can't think of what it is now, but that fraudulent feeling. Am I really a writer? Have I written enough? Have
imposter syndrome.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think racially we have imposter syndrome too a lot of times. I mean, I know I do, I eat sushi. Do I have the right to eat sushi from the actual lady who has broken English? Does she look at me and go, who are you, white person? You know what I mean? Like, what is my experience with there? So that is what Vanilla Rice was me kind of dealing with that. In Skin Dowdy, it's kind of another echo of that because it's a girl who's not happy with how she looks. So, and that is part fantasy because I would love color change tattoos. I would get those in a heartbeat if I could. But so a little bit of it was fantasy, but also still that, I am not good enough the way I am. But in the end, hopefully with both stories, the message is that yes, we are, whatever damaged, blended, thing that we are is fine. So that's ultimately the message of those. Did I
Yeah.
answer that or did I ramble? I feel like
Yeah,
I
I
rambled.
know that sounded good. It sounded really good. It'll make everybody want to rush out and buy it to see just what those flashing tattoos are like and where can we buy them.
Oh, good. In a heartbeat.
Yeah, Rena's story is quite different from the other two. Hers is more of a folklore tale, but there is still that sense of family in there, isn't there, Rena?
A little bit, but I was thinking about, I had a lot of time to think about the question while Angela and Geneve were answering. And I have a really strong relationship with my mother, and I always tell people my mom is like all of those tiger moms and all of the moms in that now I can't think of the name of the book, Amy Tan's
Oh yeah,
The Joy Luck Club.
Joy
The
Luck
Joy Luck
Club.
Club. My mom
All
is
the
all of
aunties.
those moms, like rolled into one. Like when I was little, I played, the chess and the violin, and and with the cooking and the food. But I don't think I've maybe touched on it, but I haven't like gone full into that whole relationship with my mom, and how how much she has controlled my life ever since I was little. And then I had a younger sister who actually used to get it worse than me, and she passed away. So when my younger sister passed away, it even more fell on me. And it's been interesting. It's also interesting that I haven't actually written about it yet. And she won't read any of my stories because she says they're too scary. But then when I start talking about stories or stories that I'm going to write, she'll say, "Oh, but you have to add this, or you have." So she gives me her input here and there, but she would much rather I did something else. Even when I had gone into nursing, my mom didn't think I should be a nurse. She thought I should just do people's hair. She wanted me to be a hairstylist, which I laugh about it now. But yeah, there's definitely, I think, family in all my stories, but a lot of them are families gone wrong.
Mm.
And Lee picked up on this a while back on my stories. Is can you just give us a little bit of hope there at the end? Which I really have a hard time doing because I feel like I have to keep it real. And I think part of that is growing up on Chinese drama. I mean, if you remember some of those, and I was talking to a friend of mine really recently about this. One of the first movies I ever saw when I was little that was Asian was the Susie Wong movie. And I don't know if it's a horrible, I mean, the story itself is just so sad and depressing, and especially toward Asian women, and I guess that has just stuck with me for a long time, and I've like repressed it or something, and it's just now getting resurfaced with all of these things that are happening with Asian women. And so I'll write more. I think eventually there's a story in there about the relationship between my mom and I, but for now I'm gonna just keep writing the more family stories. But yeah, the ninth tale it's folklore about the foxtail demon, the Huli Jing in Chinese folklore, and I just made her like a total badass in this because I just wanted her to just go through, and it's like foot binding. This is what I think of foot binding, and she's like, oh, I want to go back and get those guys. And there's another story in there somewhere too, where she's going to go back and change the rules and make it, illegal somehow. But yeah, and there was that couple that they were trying to out trick the trickster, and of course she wasn't going to let that happen. So it was a fun story to write. And what I did was I took all of the Chinese drama, the movies that I watched when I was younger and fell in love with, that had all the colors and the I don't know how to, there's just a certain way about those movies and even shows that you don't understand unless you're, you grew up on them and you understand the story that's kind of behind them. And, some, you can laugh about some of the behaviors that they have on there, but I wanted to write that story visually. I wanted to be able to read it, what I saw visually. And it was fun writing. And I was so happy to be a part of the Black Cranes, even though I knew my story was going to be totally different than everybody else's. I had a lot of fun writing it.
Perfect. It fitted in perfectly. You really captured, and I actually think you captured the other side of it. We've got the mother-daughter thing going on, the expectations, but we also have that whole, sexualizing of Asian women and that femme fatale. And you managed to get it in even in a sort of historic, folkloric type of tale, which was, because you, like you say, you made a badass. And so, and that was really quite, unique. Now, look, we're on 10 minutes. We've got a 10-minute warning. I knew this would just go too fast. And Lisa has come up with an amazing question, which I thought we would ask while we've got a few minutes left. What are your thoughts about the own voices movement and writers only writing from within their experiences rather than attempting to craft other characters and scenarios? For example, an Asian person writing African American characters, straight female writing, male characters' experiences, for example. So, who would like to jump in? What do we think about that? Writing widely or only writing our own experience?
I think if it's written well, I'll say recently I read a bunch of short stories that were blind submissions, and I was very surprised at some of the authors of the stories that you would think that, oh my goodness, this person had to have experienced, and it, and maybe it, I don't know, maybe they weren't who we thought or whatever, but I don't know how else to explain this. If it's written well, if it's done well, yes, and researched well, and I don't know, that it really is, because there was a lot of backlash for the Lovecraft Country, right? Or there was some, and that's a tough one.
Yeah,
I write out. I'm Asian, but like the woman in my story, and I didn't come right out and say it in the Weird Tales magazine issue that I wrote in. She's Filipino. She's she's a Filipina, but I didn't like write that part into the story, but in my mind she was Filipino. So I don't know.
Angela, do you want to jump in on that question?
Sure. I think it all comes down to the authenticity. We, like in these stories, we wrote from the Asian perspective, because that was actually the theme, but also that's our perspective. But what is our perspective? Like if my mother, say, was gay, why can't I write from that perspective? And I am writing from outside of that perspective. So for me, a lot of times I have to know what the experience is, but the experience can be how my character experienced it, if that makes any sense. Like if my mother was a lesbian, I would have some very intimate details of that. And so I don't know why I wouldn't be able to write that, as long as I could truly, authentically write those experiences. Because it's basically looking at somebody else's point of view, empathy, putting yourself in their shoes. So I don't have a problem with it, but I do see a lot of stories that come out that you're going, you have no clue. You have no clue what that, I don't even know what that's like, but I know it's not like that. And I've seen that a lot. I'm coming in the magazine, we'll have different stories that try to address some of the, especially hot topics, that come up, racism or homosexuality or things like that. And somebody will try to put that in there because they think it's going to be a button, that we will go, oh, that's racy or that's extreme, and it comes across really wrong in that case, because you can smell authenticity. You can tell if somebody's truly experienced that or not. So I don't think that we have to be from that experience to write about it, but we definitely have to have an empathetic connection with it.
Genevieve, anything to add?
I think a big part of the answer is why you're writing it. I think what's your intention and what is the story that you're going to write, whether or not it's going to be damaging in some way, you just have to be really careful. And also do your research, get beta readers and get it checked out. I think that's, I'm in a few editing Facebook pages, and that's a really big point that a lot of people are making, that if you have authors that are going to be writing outside of their experience, that they need to do the research, they need to make sure, like Angela said, that it's authentic and that it's, I think it's not damaging, that it's, your intentions are good for what you're writing and why you're writing it.
Yeah, sensitivity readers, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, ladies, we've talked too much. We have like 3 minutes, so you have a minute each to tell us what you're doing now and where everybody can find you. Rena, you're wallpapering, we know, but we don't want to hear about that.
I am working on a screenplay. I'm working on editing my next novel. I have 2 short stories that are due. And I am co-editing an anthology that's coming out next year. And I have a lot of short stories that I wrote last year that were all on hold during COVID that are going to be coming out, I think, in 2022. So next year is going to be really big, a big and busy year. And you can find me on any place, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, all that good stuff.
Great, thanks, Rena. Genevieve.
I work as a fiction editor, so I've got a couple of edits on my desk, and I've got a couple of short story commissions to get on board, and I'm presenting at a couple of conferences, and I think it doesn't sound as impressive behind Rena's answer.
There's an Asian pirate novel in the works though, right? That's coming.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That'll be good. Yes.
I want to write about I don't know how to say it. That's the not Asian enough part. Qing Shi, the Chinese pirate that's supposed to be the most formidable pirate in all of history. So nice. I want to write her story.
Fantastic. Angela, what's coming up for you?
Well, I just finished Mark My Words, which is a book that I actually wrote with Lee Murray, and the paperback is up today. And so now that that's done, coming out with the next issue of Space and Time, which is 141. And I know I've got some short stories in places coming up. And I forgot all their names suddenly. I know Hex Publishing has the Dark Landscapes.
Shadow Atlas.
Thank you.
Shadow
That's
Atlas.
the one. Yes, Shadow Atlas. And then there's the Give His Devil His Due from
the Pixel Project.
Thank you, Lee.
Just let me tell you all your stories you've got coming up. And go on. Don't forget to give your website.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And I think that's it. I know there's other stuff. Oh, going to be at Nikon with Rena. I think I just saw that today. We're going to be on a panel at Nikon. And so otherwise you can catch me at my website, which is either spaceandtime.net, which is the magazine, or angelyricosmith.com.
Thank you, ladies. And my name is Lee Murray, and you can find me at leemurray.info. And I've got, I'm working on Unquiet Spirits, which is a collection of essays with Angela Yuriko Smith, and we will be looking for some input from our Crane sisters. I'm also working on Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud, which looks at the Asian diaspora in New Zealand, and it's basically inspired by Rena's story from Black Cranes. So thank you, Rena. So that was a wonderful idea, and just spun off her beautiful work. So I'm really grateful. So Thank you, everyone in the room who came along to listen. Really grateful that you came and I hope you found something interesting in our discussion, because we did ramble on. It was just so nice to see each other again after such a long time, and especially after a wonderful Bram Stoker win. So we hope you enjoy the convention. Some of the people will be going to Discord afterwards. I'm not on Discord, so I won't be there, but please connect with us all and if you want to continue the conversation. Thanks very much, Karen, for looking after us and making sure we didn't fall off the internet.
Yes, thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
So it's still recording, everyone. So don't say anything rude about the participants who are still leaving the room.
That's
Great
right.
questions. They were good questions.
Yeah, that was fun. I do know I need to take notes though. So, you know, in the end, when you're supposed to say all the stuff, that you actually remember it.
Oh, it's terrible because you always had so much on the go. And Rena's only thinking about wallpaper and
Yes,
drywall at
I'm
the
like,
moment.
okay, I have to go finish cutting in the paint. So I've got to go roll it out now.
And I think that was me like 2 weeks ago, Rena, because in the middle of mark my words and everything else, I think I had like a stress moment where I was like, I'm just going to paint my office. That's what I have to do. I have to paint my office right now. Silver. It has to be silver. So
Oh
I
my
painted,
gosh.
didn't put anything down, didn't change clothes. It was just like, I'm just doing this now. So, and as I'm painting, I'm like, I am so crazy. What is wrong with me?
I think though, Rena, you remember I said I missed your essay, and I think that was why. I think it was in that phase, and then I found your essay, and I thought, oh my gosh, it must have been we were just the two of us were just, things were going crazy. But this last week has been crazy, hasn't it, Genevieve?
Oh, I bet.
Oh, yes. Nice crazy though.
Yeah, I mean, first time out of the blocks, a Little Miss Bram Stoker Award winner. I mean, it's just amazing. So pleased for her. So
Thank
so
you.
well deserved, really.
I was so excited about your win. I was shaking and crying, and then I thought, oh, they're announcing ours. I have to pay attention.
I was too.
Ryan almost lost an eye because I started screaming in here. And, you know, I've got these big glasses and they're really pointy on the ends, and I don't really think about that. And I'm screaming, he comes in and he's like, what's going on? So he put his head next to mine to hear like what Jonathan Mayberry was saying. And I was like, we won. And I gouged his Grace Stoker. Oh, what's wrong with you? Why are you like?
It has been overwhelming, the response to this little book, though, hasn't it?
It has.
I'm blown away. It's so humbling the way people have responded to it, and every story, someone has mentioned every story in a different review. You know, this is my favorite. This is not a single one story. I mean, Elaine's story obviously has started the anthology with a real bang, but someone's found something in everybody's story, which is this rare for an anthology, you know, that you know, every story kind of hits the mark for someone. So I'm so proud.
Glad you guys came up with the idea and decided to do it, because it was really good. I mean, you could do one every year if you wanted to.
Okay, thanks, Rena. Thanks. You're doing one right now. You do realize how much work these are.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that one though.
It's gonna be, you know, and it's funny because it really, I mean, you guys let us kind of do whatever we want, but in other anthologies where you're submitting, you're almost captured by the editor's tastes, you know, because, you know, and I have different tastes, what I like when I'm reading something versus you know, what I write sometimes, you know, because sometimes I write for a theme that requires something different that I wouldn't go there. Like, you know, for Lee's The Devil's Throat for Hellhole had some, you know, military action in there and whatnot. More action than what normally I would write for something else. But yeah, I realized that I like weird stories. I've started to go there with my writing a little bit more, but but I find that I also like to read stories, weird fiction, a little bit more than other things, I guess you would say. That's one thing I've learned about doing this, the process. You know what I mean, right? Weird fiction.
Oh
Okay.
Yeah.
Ladies, I'm sorry. I think we have to leave. I think people might be coming into this
Oh,
room,
okay.
and because we're
Okay.
chatting, people are listening,
Oh.
and they're not leaving the room. So I thought we were chatting while people were leaving, but they're actually not leaving. So very
okay.
kind of them, but I think we need to leave. So it has been a pleasure to see you all again. Rena, I hope the renovations go well.
Yeah.
Thanks.